Music does not know where it is going when it leaves the person who made it. It does not know the rooms it will enter, the hours it will arrive in, the specific human circumstances that will be waiting for it when it comes through the speaker, or over the radio, or out of the small plastic box someone is carrying in a pocket in a place that was not imagined when the music was being made. The songwriter sits in the studio and makes something true, and then the something true goes out into the world and finds, in ways the songwriter cannot predict or control, the people it was looking for. Sometimes those people are in concert halls. Sometimes they are in kitchens, in cars, in the ordinary spaces of ordinary lives where music arrives as accompaniment and becomes, without announcement, something more. And sometimes, in the rarest and most specific instances, the music arrives in a field hospital in the Mekong Delta in 1968, coming from a small cassette player in the dark, and it finds a 22-year-old soldier from Milwaukee named Danny Kowalski who has never heard a Beatles record in his life, and is lying on a cot with a shrapnel wound in his left shoulder, wondering, with the particular clarity that pain and near death and 18 months of war produce in a person, whether he is going to see his mother again. That is where in my life found Danny Kowalski, and what it did to him in that moment, what it gave him, what it carried him through, became the story that Danny Kowalski would spend the next 4 years unable to tell anyone. Because the story belonged to a moment so interior that the words for it did not exist in the language of the men he had served with, or the family he returned to, or the Wisconsin town that had sent him off and received him back with neither the understanding of what he had brought home nor the language to ask, until 1972, until a peace rally in New York City, until the moment Danny Kowalski found himself standing 12 feet from John Lennon and understood that the person he needed to tell was the person who had made the thing that had found him. What happened in that moment, what John Lennon did with what Danny told him, is the part of the story that has no witnesses except the two men who were there. This is what is known, and what the knowing points toward. Daniel Francis Kowalski was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1946, the third child of a Polish-American family that had been in the city for 2 generations. His father worked at the Chalmers manufacturing plant. His mother kept the house and the 4 children and the Catholic faith that organized the week into its proper shape. The neighborhood was the kind that produced, in the post-war decades, a particular American type, hardworking, unpretentious, rooted in a specific geography and a specific set of values that did not require examination because they had never been seriously challenged. Danny was not exceptional and did not expect to be. He expected to work, to build something, to have children, to grow old in the city where he had been born. He had a girlfriend named Patricia who would eventually become his wife, in the fullness of time and the completion of obligations that neither had chosen and both accepted without complaint. The draft notice arrived in 1966. He was 20 years old. He served with the 1st Cavalry Division. He arrived in Vietnam in the late months of 1966 and spent the following 18 months in the particular education that war provides, the one that reorganizes a person's understanding of what matters and what does not, what a human body can and cannot sustain, what the distance between being alive and not being alive actually consists of when you are close enough to see it clearly. He did not speak about it afterward. The Milwaukee neighborhood did not have a framework for those conversations. Patricia did not push. He came home, he went back to work, he built the life that had been waiting for him, and the 18 months in Vietnam existed in him as a territory without language, present in everything he did, representable in nothing he said. But there was one thing he eventually told people, one thing he could say when the right person asked. He could say that a song had saved his life. The field hospital was not a dramatic place. Requires space and light and the architecture of significant events. A field hospital in the Mekong Delta in 1968 was canvas and cots, and the specific smell of antiseptic and the sound of men in pain being quiet about it, because the being quiet about it was part of what was required. Danny had been brought in with shrapnel from a mortar round left shoulder, upper arm. Serious enough to hospitalize, not serious enough to send home. He had the particular status of a man who was going to recover and return to the thing he had recovered from. He had been on the cot for 4 days, conscious and uncomfortable and existing in the interior space of someone who has nothing to do except be present to what his body is doing and what his mind is doing with the time his body's recovery is requiring. The man in the next cot was from New York, His name was Vincent. Marchetti. Vincent had a small cassette player, technically prohibited in the field but circulating anyway, passed from hand to hand, the music it contained as necessary as the rations and more necessary than some of the regulations. Vincent played his tapes quietly, at the low volume that the hospital required and that the darkness of 3 in the morning made appropriate. Danny had never paid particular attention to music. It had been background in his life, on the radio, in the kitchen, at dances in the church hall, in cars, present but not attended to. He had not had the experience of being found by a piece of music in the way that the people who talk about music describe being found. He had that experience at 3 in the morning in a field hospital in Vietnam, in the dark, with a wound in his shoulder and 4 days of unmediated interior experience. Behind him, and an indeterminate amount of the same ahead, the cassette player was playing something that began with a sound unlike anything he associated with music he had heard before, an instrument he couldn't name, its tone delicate and slightly strange in the humid dark of the hospital. And then a voice came in. It was a voice that was simultaneously intimate and direct, not performing, not projecting, not doing the things that voices do when they are singing for a crowd, speaking almost. Speaking in the register of someone who has something true to say and has found in this melody and these words the exact way to say it. There are places I remember, all my life, though some have changed. Danny lay on his cot in the dark and listened. He did not know who was singing. He did not know the song's name. He knew none of the context, the studio, the year, the album, the partnership, the particular moment in a songwriter's life where something personal had found a form that made it universal. He knew only the voice and the words and what the words were doing to the place inside him that had been wordless for 4 days and for 18 months before that. Though I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before. He was thinking about Milwaukee, about Saturday mornings at the plant with his father, about Patricia's laugh in the church hall, about the specific smell of his mother's kitchen on winter evenings, the places he remembered, the life he had come from and might not return to and had not, until this voice in this dark, found the language to hold. The song lasted 3 minutes and 28 seconds. When it ended, Danny did not move. He lay in the dark. And something that had been held rigid in him for 18 months, the locked-down, pressurized quality of someone who has been surviving rather than living, released itself in the particular way that release happens when music does what it is actually for. Not the dramatic release of breakdown. The quiet release of someone finding, in the words another person wrote in a different world for a different reason, a language that fits around their own experience and makes it bearable. He asked Vincent in the morning who had been singing. Vincent told him the Beatles, John Lennon's voice, album called Rubber Soul, song called In My Life. Danny nodded. He filed the name away in the place where he filed things that mattered and that he did not yet have a context for using. He recovered. He returned to his unit. He finished his tour. Home. Patricia met him at the airport in Milwaukee. She held him for a long time and did not ask questions because she understood, with the instinct of someone who knows a person well enough to read their body rather than their words, that questions were not what was needed. She drove him home. She was patient in the way that the people who love returning soldiers have to be patient, accepting the distance, not requiring it to close faster than it can close. Danny went back to work at a construction company. He built things with his hands, which was the right kind of work for someone who needed to be in his body without being in his thoughts. He did not talk about Vietnam. He was not, by any visible measure, a person who appeared to be struggling, but he bought every Beatles record. Not immediately, it took a few months, the time required to find his footing, but he found them. Rubber Soul first. He sat in the apartment he and Patricia shared and played In My Life with his eyes closed and felt again, but differently in the context of being home rather than being away, what the song had done to him in the dark of the hospital. Then the others, Revolver, SGT, Pepper, The White Album, Abbey Road. He listened with the attention of someone who has a specific relationship with one of the voices, who knows, from personal experience in an extreme circumstance, what that voice can do when it arrives in the right place at the right time. He learned about John Lennon, read the interviews, followed the activism of the early 1970s, the anti-war work, the rallies, the songs addressed directly to the political moment. He found in John's public positions on Vietnam a strange resonance. Here was the person whose voice had found him in a field hospital, speaking out against the war that had put him there. He thought more than once about trying to communicate this, but the mechanism did not exist. You could not write a letter that would reach John Lennon. You could not call. You could not find a way through the apparatus of fame to the actual person on the other side of it. And then, in the spring of 1972, he could. The peace rally in Bryant Park in Manhattan was not the largest event of its kind that year. The anti-war movement had been producing enormous gatherings for several years, and this one was modest by comparison. But John Lennon was there. He had been there for the whole movement, had lent his face and his voice and his considerable public presence to the cause with the consistency of someone who believed in it rather than someone who was performing belief in it. He appeared on stages at rallies and spoke and sometimes sang, and afterward he moved through the crowds in the way that famous people sometimes move through crowds when the event is right and the guards have not yet closed the circle completely. Danny was in the crowd. He had driven from Milwaukee with Patricia, who understood without fully understanding why this trip mattered, and who had accepted the 6-hour drive and the overnight stay, and the standing in a Manhattan park for 3 hours, because she knew her husband well enough to know that this was necessary without needing to know exactly why. He saw John Lennon at a distance of perhaps 30 feet, moving along the edge of the crowd after the speeches, surrounded by a loose group of people, not security exactly, just people, the organic formation that gathers around. Famous people in public spaces. John was talking, shaking hands, engaging with the individuals who reached him before the formation closed again. Danny pushed through the crowd, not aggressively, not the pushing of someone making a scene. The careful, deliberate pushing of someone who has decided that they are going to do something and is moving toward it without drama. Patricia stayed where she was, watching him go, understanding. He got to within 12 feet, then 10, then 8. John Lennon turned and looked at him. What Danny Kowalski said to John Lennon in that moment has been recounted by Danny himself in the years that followed with the careful precision of someone who has been over a memory so many times it has become polished, not distorted, but refined, clarified, reduced to its essential shape. He said, "I was in a field hospital in Vietnam in 1968. I had a shrapnel wound. The man in the next cot had a cassette player, and at 3 in the morning your song came on. In my life, I didn't know who you were. I didn't know the song. I just heard it in something." He paused here in the recounting, searching for the right word. Something opened. "I made it home. I don't know if I would have without it." He said it quickly and directly, the way people say things they have been saving for a long time, not with drama, but with the specific urgency of something that has been waiting for its moment and has now recognized that the moment is here. John Lennon listened. This is the part that Danny always returned to in every subsequent telling, that John listened, completely, without the half-attention of a famous person managing a crowd interaction, without the performed warmth of someone going through the motions of acknowledgement. He stood still and listened with his whole body to what Danny was saying, and his face did something in the listening that Danny, who was not a person with a large vocabulary for facial expressions and their meanings, found he could only describe as he heard it. When Danny finished, there was a moment of silence, not the uncomfortable silence of someone buying time for an appropriate response. The natural silence of someone receiving something that requires a moment before anything else. And then John Lennon said one word. He said, "Good," not the good of dismissal, not the good of someone moving on, the specific, quiet, complete good of someone who has just been told something that landed exactly where it was supposed to land, that the thing they made did what they were trying to make it do in a place and a circumstance they could not have imagined, for a person they did not know existed. The good of confirmation, of having the answer, finally, to the question that every person who makes something true lives with. Did it reach anyone? Did it do anything real? Good. Danny Kowalski nodded. John Lennon put his hand briefly on Danny's arm. And then the formation closed, and John was moving again, and Danny turned and found Patricia, and they stood together in the Bryant Park crowd for a while before walking back toward where the car was parked. He did not need more than that. He had not needed a long conversation or an acknowledgement of significance or a reciprocal story of what the songwriting had meant. He had needed to close the loop, to deliver the information to its intended recipient, to say to the person who had made the thing, "Here is what the thing did," and it had been received. The one word was enough. The one word was exactly enough. Danny Kowalski drove back to Milwaukee with Patricia. He went back to his construction work. He and Patricia had 2 children and then 3, and built the life that they had both always expected to build in the city where they had grown up, around the values and the rhythms that had always organized it. He kept the Beatles records. He played them for his children when they were old enough, not with the urgency of someone trying to transmit an experience, but with the ease of someone sharing something they loved. His eldest daughter became a particular fan. His son was indifferent but respectful. The music was in the house in the way that music is in houses when a parent has a genuine relationship with it, not imposed but present. Available, he heard the news about John Lennon on December 9, 1980, on the radio on the way to a job site. He pulled the truck over. He sat for a while on the side of the road. Patricia would say later that she had never seen him cry, that this was the first time in the 17 years of their marriage and the years before that and the time in Vietnam and everything in between that she had seen her husband weep. He had not cried when he came home from the war. He had not cried at his parents' funerals. He cried on the side of a road in Milwaukee in December 1980, alone in a truck, for a man he had spoken to once for 8 seconds in a park in Manhattan 8 years before. He cried, he later said, because the word had come from somewhere real, because the person who had said good in Bryant Park had meant it, had received what was given to him, had confirmed with one word that the transaction between a song and a listener, the most private and most necessary transaction in music, was real, that it had happened, that it was worth the having happened. The good was still good, the song still played. The field hospital in the Mekong Delta was still there in 1965's Rubber Soul, preserved in the harpsichord and the voice, available to the next person who needed it in whatever dark they were lying in, whatever wound they were carrying, whatever wordless interior landscape they needed a voice to enter and give language to. Danny Kowalski told this story for the first time publicly in 1985 at a Veterans Day ceremony in Milwaukee. He had been asked to speak and had prepared remarks about service and sacrifice and the things that Veterans Day ceremonies require their speakers to address. He delivered those remarks, and then at the end he said, "There is one more thing." He told the story of the field hospital and the cassette player and Vincent Marchetti and the voice in the dark. He told the story of the peace rally in 1972 and the 12 feet and the 8 seconds and the one word. The audience, mostly veterans, mostly people who had their own versions of the wordless territory, who understood what it meant to be in a place that language could not reach, listened in the specific silence of people receiving something true. When he was finished, there was a long pause, and then the applause, which was not the applause of an audience approving a performance, but the applause of people confirming something. Yes, that, exactly that. In My Life played on the sound system as the ceremony concluded. Danny Kowalski stood at the podium and did not move until the song was over. It lasted 3 minutes and 28 seconds, the same as it always had, the same as it always will. What does a song do in the dark of a field hospital when no one imagined it would be there? It does what it was made to do. It finds the person who needed it and gives them language for the wordless thing and carries them in whatever small but sufficient way toward the morning. John Lennon wrote In My Life in 1965. He could not have known where it was going. It knew.